Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Mind. Tonight, we are going somewhere that arrives only once a year, and only if you are paying close enough attention to catch it. Not a place you travel to exactly, though people do travel, sometimes great distances, just to stand inside it for an afternoon. It is more a quality of the world, a particular light, a particular sound underfoot, a particular way the air holds itself in the hour before the temperature drops, and the sky goes a shade of blue it only manages in October. We are spending this evening with falling leaves. It sounds simple, and it is, in the way that the most extraordinary things often are. A leaf detaches from a branch. It moves through air. It lands somewhere. And yet inside that brief, unhurried journey, there is more happening than almost anyone who has ever watched it has thought to look for. Chemistry that has been building since midsummer. Physics that resists easy prediction. Biology so precise and so quietly intentional that the tree has already healed the wound before the leaf has left it. Falling leaves are not a sign of decline. They are a sign of extraordinary competence, of a living system doing exactly what it means to do in exactly the right season, for reasons that have been refined across hundreds of millions of years of patience. And there is something else in them too, something that poets and painters and philosophers on several different continents reached for independently across thousands of years of human culture. The falling leaf as a teaching, not a sad one, a clear one. The world demonstrating, in the most visible and graceful way it knows, that letting go is not loss. That release, done well, looks exactly like this. If these quiet journeys into sleep are something you find yourself returning to, I would love for you to like this video or subscribe to The Sleepy Mind. It helps more tired and curious people find their way here, one gentle evening at a time. But for now, there is nothing required of you. No decisions waiting. No problems that need solving tonight. Let your body settle into wherever it is resting. Let your shoulders drop a little further than they were a moment ago. Let your eyes, if they are still open, grow soft at the edges. The leaves are already falling. We only need to watch. Let's begin. There is a word for the thing that happens when a leaf finally lets go of its branch. It is called abscission. It comes from the Latin, from words meaning to cut off, to sever cleanly. But the word, precise as it is, does not quite prepare you for what the process actually involves. Because abscission is not an accident. It is not decay. It is not the tree losing something it was trying to keep. It is the tree doing something it has been preparing to do, quietly and with great deliberateness, for the better part of an entire season. Every leaf that has ever fallen from a deciduous tree fell because the tree decided to release it. That decision was made at the cellular level, but a decision it was nonetheless. At the base of every leaf stem, in the narrow junction where the leaf meets the branch, there is a structure called the abscission zone. It is not visible to the eye. It sits inside the tissue, unremarkable in appearance, and for most of the growing season, it does nothing that announces itself. But it is always there, waiting. It is built from two distinct layers of cells, each with a different role, each understanding its part in the sequence that will eventually bring the leaf down. The first layer is called the separation layer. When the time comes, cells in this layer begin secreting enzymes that dissolve the material holding them together. That material, called the middle lamella, is what binds plant cells to one another like mortar between bricks. As it breaks down, the leaf's connection to the branch becomes increasingly mechanical rather than biological. The leaf hangs on, for a time, by geometry more than by chemistry. A light wind is usually enough to finish the work. But before that wind arrives, before the leaf has taken its first movement toward the ground, something else has already happened. The second layer, called the protective layer, has been hardening. Cells there have been laying down a kind of natural sealant, a waxy, corky material that closes the sight of the coming separation before the separation is complete. The tree has, in other words, already healed the wound that the falling leaf will leave. The branch has sealed itself against winter. The loss is accommodated before it has fully arrived. This is one of the quieter marvels of deciduous life. The tree is not caught off guard by autumn. It does not scramble to repair the damage after the fact. It prepares the repair in advance, while the leaf is still green and still working, still carrying out its last weeks of photosynthesis, with no outward sign that anything is changing. The ending is built into the living, invisibly, long before the ending begins. What triggers all of this is not cold, exactly. People often assume that the first frost brings the leaves down, that the tree is responding to damage, retreating from injury. But the primary signal is something more precise and more ancient than temperature. It is light. Specifically, it is the shortening of daylight hours as summer tilts toward autumn. Specialized proteins in the leaf, called photoreceptors, are sensitive not to how bright a day is, but to how long it is. As the hours of light decrease past a certain threshold, those proteins send a chemical signal that initiates the abscission sequence. The leaf has been measuring the days all summer. It knows, in the way that living systems know things, which is to say through chemistry rather than thought, that the days are shortening. And when they shorten past a certain point, it begins the process of letting go. Temperature does play a role, but a secondary one. A cold snap in September will accelerate the timeline. A warm autumn will delay it. But the underlying direction of things is set by light, which is consistent and reliable, and does not vary from year to year the way weather does. The tree does not guess about autumn. It reads it, in the length of the shadow it casts each afternoon, in the slow withdrawing of the light. And it responds with a precision that has been refined across hundreds of millions of years of practice. There is something worth sitting with in that. The tree is not holding on past the right moment. It is not struggling to keep what it has. It begins releasing at exactly the point when releasing is the appropriate response to the world as it actually is. The leaf is not lost. It is returned. The whole process, from the first enzymatic signal in the separation layer to the final settling of the leaf on the forest floor, is not a failure of the tree's grip. It is a demonstration of its wisdom. And underneath that wisdom, there is something even more particular happening. Something that turns a green leaf into a thing of unexpected color before it falls. Something that has been building, molecule by molecule, since the very first shortening of the days. It is happening in the chemistry of the leaf itself, in the pigments it carries, and the pigments it is only now beginning to make. And it is for most of the year, a leaf is green. This seems like a simple fact, an obvious one, the kind of thing a person registers and then moves past without further thought. But the greenness of a leaf is not a passive quality, not a fixed color the way a painted wall is colored. It is the visible result of a continuous, effortful process. It is, in a sense, work. The green comes from chlorophyll, a molecule found in tiny structures inside leaf cells called chloroplasts. Chlorophyll has a remarkable ability. When light strikes it, it absorbs the red and blue portions of the spectrum and reflects the green portion back, which is what the eye sees. But more importantly, the absorbed energy is used to drive photosynthesis, the process by which the tree converts light, water, and carbon dioxide into the sugars it needs to grow and sustain itself. Chlorophyll is not decorative. It is the engine. But chlorophyll is chemically unstable. It breaks down continuously in sunlight and must be replaced just as continuously to remain visible. Throughout spring and summer, the tree invests real energy in manufacturing fresh chlorophyll to replenish what is always breaking down. The green of a summer leaf is maintained, actively and at ongoing cost, all season long. When the abscission signal begins and the tree starts preparing to shed its leaves, it stops producing new chlorophyll. The supply is cut off. The existing chlorophyll, no longer being replaced, breaks down and disappears over the course of days, sometimes within a single week. And as it goes, something is revealed that was always there, hidden beneath the green all summer long. Yellow and orange. These colours come from pigments called carotenoids, which include compounds such as beta-carotene and a family of molecules called xanthophylls. Carotenoids are present in the leaf throughout the growing season. They are part of the leaf's basic structure, participating quietly in photosynthesis by capturing wavelengths of light that chlorophyll alone cannot use efficiently. But in spring and summer, the chlorophyll is so abundant and so vivid that it masks the carotenoids entirely. When the green withdraws, the yellow and orange are not created. They are simply uncovered. They were there the whole time. This is one of the more quietly astonishing things about autumn colour. The golds and the ambers and the soft butter yellows of birch and beech and ginkgo were present in every leaf during every week of summer. The tree was carrying all of that warmth inside it, invisible all along. The reds are different. Red and purple autumn colours, the vivid scarlets of maples, the deep burgundy of certain oaks, the brilliant crimson of blueberry and sumac, come from a class of pigments called anthocyanins. And unlike the carotenoids, anthocyanins are not being revealed in autumn. They are being manufactured, freshly, specifically for this season. The reason they are made involves the same mechanism that is cutting the leaf off from the rest of the tree. As the abscission layer forms, it restricts the flow of materials between the leaf and the branch. Sugars that the leaf has been producing through photosynthesis can no longer move down into the tree's vascular system. They accumulate inside the leaf. And in the presence of those accumulated sugars, combined with the influence of light and the slightly acidic conditions of the senescing leaf tissue, anthocyanin synthesis begins. The leaf makes its own redness. It manufactures colour in response to the particular chemical conditions of its own ending. This means that the vividness of red autumn leaves is not purely a function of the tree's genetics, though that matters. It is also a function of how much sugar the leaf was producing before the abscission layer closed. A summer with good rainfall and plentiful sunlight produces leaves rich in sugar, which produces leaves capable of brilliant red. A drought summer produces leaves with less sugar and therefore, in many cases, less red. And there is one more condition that deepens the red. Warm, sunny days in early autumn allow photosynthesis to continue, building sugar. Cool nights, dropping below about 7 degrees Celsius, slow the metabolic processes that would otherwise continue to use that sugar up. The sugar stays in the leaf. The anthocyanins build. The reds intensify. The best autumn colour is the product of a particular kind of weather, and that weather does not arrive on any predictable schedule. It can be more or less favourable from year to year, which is part of what makes a spectacular autumn feel like something received rather than expected. A gift made possible by conditions that aligned just so, for reasons having nothing to do with anyone's plans. Brown, the colour of the leaf in its final stage before falling, comes from compounds called tannins. Tannins are present throughout the leaf for most of its life, serving as a chemical defense against insects and fungi. As chlorophyll and carotenoids and anthocyanins all finally break down in the last days before abscission is complete, the tannins remain, patient and persistent, and the leaf takes on that warm, papery brown that is the signature colour of the forest floor in late autumn. Every colour the eye sees in a fall forest is chemistry, but it is chemistry performed over a timeline that spans months, responding to conditions that span seasons, producing results that have been moving poets to put down their work and simply look for thousands of years. The chemistry does not diminish the beauty, it deepens it. It adds a dimension to the colour that purely aesthetic appreciation does not reach, that the red of a maple in October was made from the leaf's own sugar, built in response to the conditions of its own ending, makes the red mean something that goes beyond red. Not every tree sheds its leaves in autumn. There are trees that hold their green all year, standing unchanged through cold and snow, offering a visual continuity that deciduous trees do not. These are the evergreens, and they have their own strategies for surviving cold seasons. But deciduous trees took a different path, and the path they took involves an act of deliberate release that, once understood, begins to look less like limitation and more like a particular form of intelligence. The word deciduous comes from the Latin decidere, meaning to fall down or fall off. Approximately 30% of tree species worldwide are deciduous. They are concentrated in the temperate regions, where seasons are distinct enough that the demands of winter and summer require genuinely different strategies. What works in June does not work in January. And rather than trying to maintain the same structure across conditions that differ enormously, the deciduous tree changes its structure to fit the conditions. It sheds one form and waits for the season in which that form makes sense again. The reason for shedding is primarily water. Leaves lose water through tiny pores on their surface called stomata, which must open to allow the exchange of gases that photosynthesis requires. In warm, moist months, this is a reasonable trade. Water is relatively available, and the energy produced by photosynthesis justifies the loss. But as temperatures fall and water in the soil becomes locked in ice or harder to absorb, the equation changes. The cost of maintaining leaves and the water loss they represent begins to exceed the benefit they provide. The tree sheds its leaves the way a traveller sheds heavy gear before a difficult crossing, not reluctantly, strategically. The scale of this shedding is not small. A single mature oak tree may carry as many as 700,000 leaves through a growing season, and it releases all of them in the space of a few weeks. That is a vast quantity of material, returned to the earth at once, a generosity so large it is difficult to take in at the scale of the individual tree. There is a detail about deciduous leaf fall that surprises most people who encounter it for the first time. Leaves on the same branch, even leaves growing side by side from the same small twig, are not necessarily at the same stage of the abscission process at the same time. One leaf may be deepening from orange to brown, while its neighbour is still carrying green. One may be hanging by almost nothing, while another is still firmly attached. The tree does not shed in a single coordinated event, though it can appear that way from a distance. Up close, the process is individual, leaf by leaf, each following its own particular timeline within the broader seasonal arc. Some deciduous trees observe a further variation on this pattern. They shed their leaves in autumn, as expected, but the dead leaves remain on the branches through winter rather than falling immediately. This phenomenon is called marcescence, and it is observed most commonly in oaks and beeches. The leaves go brown and dry but stay attached, rustling audibly in winter winds, adding a papery, whispering quality to the forest in the coldest months. Why some trees retain their dead leaves is not fully understood, even now. One theory holds that the retained leaves deter browsing animals such as deer, who are less interested in dry dead foliage than in the young buds beneath. Another theory suggests that by holding the leaves through winter and dropping them in spring, the tree delivers a pulse of nutrients to the soil just as the growing season begins, when those nutrients are most immediately useful. The tree may be timing its generosity as precisely as it times everything else. There is one further piece of the picture worth carrying. Evergreen trees are not truly exempt from leaf loss. They shed leaves continuously, a few at a time, throughout the year. The shedding is so evenly distributed that it rarely draws attention. No single moment of mass release. No carpet of colour on the ground beneath them. Just a quiet, steady, ongoing return, too gradual to watch, but constant enough that the forest floor beneath an evergreen is never bare. The difference between an evergreen and a deciduous tree is not between a tree that holds on and a tree that lets go. It is a difference in timing. Both trees let go. One does it all at once, in a great visible seasonal release. The other does it so slowly and so evenly that the letting go is invisible. Both strategies work. Both have persisted for millions of years. They simply represent two different answers to the same question, which is how to move through time in a world that keeps changing. A leaf leaving its branch does not simply drop. The word fall implies a straightforward downward motion, a surrendering to gravity. But what actually happens is considerably more interesting and considerably less predictable than that. A falling leaf is a small object with a complex shape moving through a fluid, which is to say moving through air, and the interaction between that shape and that fluid produces a path that can twist and glide and oscillate and tumble in ways that are genuinely difficult to anticipate, even with modern physics. Scientists who study the dynamics of falling objects have identified at least 4 distinct modes of descent that a leaf can follow, depending on its physical characteristics. A leaf may fall in a steady glide, traveling a smooth diagonal path, somewhat like a paper airplane. It may flutter, rocking gently back and forth around a central axis as it descends, creating the seesawing motion that is perhaps the most recognizable image of a leaf in autumn. It may tumble, rotating end over end with no stable orientation. Or it may fall chaotically, shifting between modes in a pattern that resists prediction entirely. Which mode a given leaf follows depends on several physical properties. The leaf's mass matters. The surface area it presents to the air matters. The ratio between those two quantities, how heavy the leaf is, relative to how much air resistance its surface creates, determines where it sits in what fluid dynamicists describe, using a number called the Froude number. A heavy leaf with little surface area falls relatively quickly and steadily. A light leaf with large surface area is more vulnerable to the irregularities of even gently moving air, and it flutters. The speed at which a leaf falls in perfectly still air reaches what is called terminal velocity at approximately 1 meter per second. That is the speed at which the upward force of air resistance precisely equals the downward pull of gravity. A leaf falling from the top of a tall tree, perhaps 25 or 30 meters above the ground, may take 30 seconds or more to complete its descent in still air. That is a long time for something so small to travel so short a distance. A long, unhurried journey. Wind complicates the picture further. A dried leaf, light and brittle, can be carried horizontally by even a moderate wind for distances that seem improbable given how small the leaf is. Studies of dispersal in forests have found leaves settled more than a kilometer from their source tree, carried by gusts that caught them at the moment of release. The leaf's journey is therefore not simply from the branch to the ground beneath it. It is from the branch to wherever the air decides to put it, which may be a different patch of forest entirely. Maple trees have refined this dispersal mechanism to an art form. The seeds of a maple, called samaras, are attached to a papery wing that is asymmetric in shape. As the samara falls, the asymmetry causes it to spin around a central axis, creating a stable rotational descent called autorotation. This spinning slows the descent considerably, giving the wind more time to work on the seed and carry it farther from the parent tree. Foresters and engineers have studied the maple samara closely, and its aerodynamic properties have influenced the design of small rotating aircraft components, as well as a range of slow descent delivery systems for various applications. There is something in the sheer unpredictability of a falling leaf's path that has made it, across many different cultures and many different centuries, an image associated with the release of control. The leaf does not choose its path. It brings certain qualities to the journey, its shape, its weight, its surface, and then it enters the air and is moved by forces larger than itself. The outcome is not fixed. It is negotiated moment by moment between the leaf and the medium it moves through. In East Asian philosophy, this quality of movement was understood not as passivity, but as a form of responsiveness. The leaf does not resist the air. It participates with it. The path that results is not the leaf's path exactly, nor the air's path exactly. It is something that neither could have produced alone. The ground it finally reaches is the place that their particular encounter led to, and that, people have found, is worth watching. Slowly, from stillness. The moment a leaf lands is not the end of its story. In many ways, it is a beginning. The leaf that has spent a whole season as part of the canopy, gathering light, manufacturing sugar, participating in the life of the tree above, now enters a different system entirely. One that operates at ground level, in darkness and moisture, over timescales that make the single growing season look brief. The fallen leaf becomes part of what ecologists call leaf litter, the layer of organic material that accumulates on the forest floor beneath deciduous trees. This layer is not debris in the way the word litter might suggest. It is infrastructure. It insulates the soil from extreme temperature swings, keeping the ground warmer in winter and cooler in summer. It reduces the evaporation of soil moisture by acting as a physical barrier between the damp earth and the drying air. A healthy layer of leaf litter can reduce moisture loss from the soil beneath it by up to 50% compared to bare ground. In drought conditions, that difference can mean the survival of the very roots that produce the leaves in the first place. The decomposition of a fallen leaf involves an orderly succession of organisms, each doing a different kind of work, each preparing the material for the next stage. Fungi arrive first. They extend thread-like structures called hyphae into the leaf tissue and begin secreting enzymes that break down the leaf's most structurally resistant components. Lignin, the compound that gives wood and leaf tissue its rigidity, and cellulose, the primary structural molecule in plant cell walls, are both extraordinarily difficult to dismantle. Fungi are among the very few organisms capable of doing this work. Without them, the forest floor would accumulate an insurmountable depth of undecomposed plant material, and the nutrients locked inside it would remain unavailable to living roots. Bacteria follow, moving into the spaces the fungi have opened and digesting the compounds that the fungal enzymes have already partly dismantled. Where fungi work from the outside in, secreting enzymes and absorbing the results, bacteria work in direct chemical contact with the material, taking apart molecules that are already partially broken. Then come the invertebrates, millipedes, earthworms, springtails, pillbugs, beetle larvae, and many others physically shred the leaf material into progressively smaller pieces. This shredding is important not because the invertebrates themselves fully digest the leaves, but because it dramatically increases the surface area available for microbial work. A whole leaf offers a certain surface area for bacterial and fungal enzymes to work on. That same leaf, shredded into 1,000 small pieces, offers vastly more. The invertebrates are, in a sense, pre-processing the material, preparing it for the microorganisms in the same way that chewing prepares food for digestion. The soil that results from all of this work is among the most biologically dense material on Earth. A single teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains more individual microorganisms than there are human beings alive on the planet today. The decomposed leaf, reduced from its original form to humus, becomes part of this extraordinary community, releasing carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus back into a form that plant roots can absorb. The tree that shed the leaf in autumn may, by the following summer, be drawing some of those same atoms back up through its roots and into a new leaf. The cycle is not metaphorical, it is chemical and literal. The leaf litter layer serves one more function that is easily overlooked. It is habitat. For hundreds of species that do not live in the canopy above or in the soil below, but specifically in the layer of organic material between them. Lunar moths and swallowtail butterflies overwinter as pupae in leaf litter, tucked into curled leaves or nestled between layers of decomposing material. Salamanders shelter there through cold months. Ground-nesting birds use it as nesting material. Small mammals tunnel through it. An autumn garden that is too thoroughly raked, too efficiently cleared of its fallen leaves, is a habitat that has been removed. The tidiness comes at a cost that plays out across the following spring, in the absence of insects that would otherwise have emerged from the leaf layer with the warming weather. The leaf that left its branch in October and came to rest on the soil beneath the tree was not finished. It had completed one form of its work and begun another. Quietly, in the dark, below the sight line of anyone passing by. As it decomposed, it was rebuilding the conditions for the life it came from. Patient, invisible, essential. In response to a warmer world, autumn leaf color is not evenly distributed across the world. It concentrates in particular regions, in particular combinations of tree species and climate, and it does so with a vividness that varies enormously from one part of the planet to another. To understand where the most spectacular autumn color occurs, it helps to understand what conditions produce it, and why those conditions come together in some places and not others. The regions most famous for autumn color are the temperate broadleaf forests of the northeastern United States, eastern Canada, Japan, and parts of northern China and Korea. These are places that share several important characteristics. They experience 4 clearly distinct seasons. They receive sufficient rainfall during the growing season to support dense broadleaf forest cover, and they contain high proportions of tree species that produce strong color changes in autumn, particularly the maples, birches, aspens, beeches, and oaks that produce such striking displays of yellow, orange, and red. The northeastern United States and the Canadian Maritime provinces produce some of the most intense red color anywhere on Earth, and the reason is largely species composition. Sugar maples in particular are capable of producing extraordinarily vivid anthocyanin pigments when the autumn conditions are right, warm sunny days followed by cool nights, creating the sugar accumulation that drives red pigment production. A landscape covered in sugar maples in peak color is not subtle. It is saturated with a warmth and intensity that photographers and painters have been attempting to capture for 2 centuries, with varying degrees of success. Japan approaches autumn color differently. There, the tradition of traveling to view full foliage has a name: koyo, meaning autumn leaves. It is a cultural institution in the same way that hanami, the spring practice of viewing cherry blossoms, is a cultural institution. The 2 traditions reflect the same underlying aesthetic orientation, the finding of meaning and beauty in brief seasonal natural events that will not last. Peak koyo is tracked across Japan the way weather systems are tracked. Meteorological agencies report its progress as it moves southward down the archipelago through October and November, and millions of people plan travel around it, visiting famous gardens, mountain valleys, and temple grounds to stand inside the color before it passes. The Great Smoky Mountains in the southeastern United States offer a different kind of autumn display. Rather than the saturated uniformity of a sugar maple forest, the Smokies produce a gradated, layered color that reflects the extraordinary diversity of tree species in the region. The area contains more tree species than all of northern Europe combined, a remnant of the vast temperate forest that covered much of the continent before the last ice age, and which survived in this particular region because the north-south orientation of the Appalachian valleys allowed species to migrate southward as the glaciers advanced and northward again as they retreated. The result is a patchwork of colour in autumn that shifts in tone and intensity depending on elevation, aspect, and the particular mix of species growing in each hollow and on each ridge. Latitude, altitude, and proximity to water all influence the timing and intensity of autumn colour in any given place. Higher elevations cool faster and experience shorter days earlier in the season, so autumn colour tends to begin higher on a mountainside and progress downward over the following weeks. Large bodies of water moderate temperature, delaying the cool nights that accelerate colour development, which is why lake shores and coastal forests often lag behind inland forests by a week or two. Cities complicate the picture in a specific way. The urban heat island effect, the warming caused by the concentration of buildings, roads, and human activity in dense urban areas, keeps nighttime temperatures in cities measurably warmer than in surrounding rural areas. Since cool nights are one of the key triggers for colour development, urban trees often change colour noticeably later than trees in nearby forests. The maple on a city street and the maple growing a few kilometres away in a rural woodland experience the same shortening of days, but not the same nights. Climate change is altering all of these patterns at a rate that is now measurable. Studies of autumn foliage timing in the northeastern United States show that peak colour has shifted approximately 2 to 3 weeks later over the past 5 decades compared to historical records. The growing season is extending. Warm autumns are delaying the cold nights that trigger colour. The landscape is changing, not in its species or its underlying biology, but in the timing of the performance it puts on each year. The leaves still fall, the chemistry still unfolds, but the calendar on which it unfolds is shifting slowly. There is a tree in the world that carries a leaf unlike any other leaf on earth. Its shape is a fan, soft-edged and symmetrical, divided at its outer margin into 2 gentle lobes by a shallow central notch. It is simple enough to sketch from memory, delicate enough that light passes through it easily, ancient enough that it was already producing that same shape 200 million years ago, long before the first flowering plants existed, long before the forests that we now think of as ancient had any reason to exist. The tree is called ginkgo biloba. The name refers to the leaf, biloba, meaning two-lobed. It is sometimes called a living fossil, and that phrase, overused as it has become, genuinely applies here. The leaf shape visible on a ginkgo today is essentially identical to leaf impressions found in fossil rock from the Jurassic and Triassic periods. Dinosaurs walked beneath trees that bore this leaf. The earliest mammals sheltered under it. The continents were in different positions when this shape first appeared, and the shape has remained while everything around it changed. Ginkgo biloba is not only the last surviving species in its genus, it is the last surviving species in its entire division of plants, the Ginkgophyta, a group that once contained many genera, widely distributed across the Mesozoic landscape. Every other member of that division is gone, known now only from fossils. The ginkgo persists, in cultivation, carefully maintained by humans in temple gardens and urban streets for centuries, and in a small number of possibly wild populations in remote mountain valleys in eastern China. It survived the mass extinctions that took so much else. It survived the ice ages. It survived barely the narrowing of its range to a handful of locations before human cultivation spread it again across the world. The German poet Goethe became fascinated by the ginkgo leaf in 1815, when he received a specimen as a gift and spent time contemplating its two-lobed form. He wrote a poem about it, one of his most celebrated later works, in which he used the leaf's divided yet unified shape as a metaphor for the question of whether two things that appear separate might actually be one. The poem is addressed to someone he loved, or so it is generally understood, and the ginkgo leaf becomes in his hands both an object of natural wonder and a private symbol of longing. A leaf pressed between the pages of a letter, carrying the weight of a feeling the words alone could not quite hold. In Japan and China, ginkgo trees have been planted for centuries near temples and sacred sites. They are understood as trees of endurance, of survival, of connection between the living and the long past. When the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima in August of 1945, it destroyed nearly everything within a wide radius of the explosion. Among the ruins, within 1.5 kilometers of the hypocenter, 6 ginkgo trees survived. Their upper growth was destroyed, but their root systems persisted, and within months they had re-sprouted from the base. They are still standing. People call them the survivor trees, and they are visited today as living witnesses to both the destruction of that day and the persistence of life in its aftermath. In autumn, ginkgo trees display a color that is pure and unambiguous, in a way that few other deciduous trees manage. The leaves turn yellow, not amber, not orange, not the complex mixture of pigments that most deciduous trees display, but a clean, direct, uncomplicated yellow that in bright autumn sunlight takes on an almost luminous quality, as though the leaf is generating its own light rather than reflecting someone else's. This purity of color comes from the fact that ginkgo trees do not produce anthocyanins. There are no reds, no purples, no complex interactions of competing pigments, just the carotenoids, revealed as the chlorophyll withdraws, producing yellow as straightforwardly and completely as a color can be produced. And then, often within a single day or two, the ginkgo drops nearly all of its leaves at once. Most deciduous trees shed over the course of weeks, individual leaves releasing on their own schedules, the canopy thinning gradually. The ginkgo does something different. The leaves fall in something close to mass synchrony, as though the tree decided all at once. Beneath a ginkgo in peak autumn, you can sometimes watch the leaves falling continuously for an entire afternoon, not drifting one by one, but releasing in small cascades, until the ground around the base of the tree is covered in a perfect circle of yellow, and the branches above are bare. No one has fully explained the mechanism behind this synchronous release. It has been observed consistently enough to be considered a characteristic of the species, but the precise signal that triggers simultaneous abscission across so many leaves at once remains imperfectly understood. The ginkgo does not explain itself. It simply does what it has always done, dropping its ancient leaves onto the ground beneath it, then standing bare through the winter months, waiting with the patience of something that has already outlasted more than anyone can easily imagine. Among the most abundant forms in the natural world, the leaf is also among the most varied. More than 400,000 plant species produce leaves, and no two species produce exactly the same shape. What looks, from a distance, like simple green flatness resolves, up close, into an astonishing diversity of edges and angles and surfaces and structures, each one the result of a specific evolutionary history, each adapted to a specific set of conditions. Reading a leaf's shape is a way of reading the story of the place it comes from. Leaves in environments where rainfall is abundant face a particular challenge. Water sitting on a leaf surface for extended periods encourages the growth of algae, mosses, and the fungal organisms that can damage leaf tissue. Many tropical and subtropical leaves have evolved an elongated pointed tip, called a drip tip, which channels water off the leaf surface quickly, directing it to the tip, and allowing it to fall cleanly rather than pooling and spreading. Walk through a rainforest and look closely at the leaves around you. Almost everyone will end in a point, and that point is doing a specific job, efficiently, without anyone having designed it. Leaves in dry environments face the opposite challenge. In conditions where water is scarce and the air is warm and drying, a leaf must minimize water loss. Small leaves lose less water than large ones by virtue of having less surface area. Waxy coatings on the leaf surface reduce evaporation. Rolled edges or needle shapes limit the exposure of the leaf's interior to air movement. The plants of arid landscapes have arrived at these solutions independently across different lineages, in deserts on different continents. The cactus spine, which is a modified leaf, reduces the original leaf structure to something so minimal that water loss becomes almost negligible. The eucalyptus leaf hangs vertically, presenting its edge rather than its face to the midday sun, reducing direct irradiation and therefore reducing the temperature differential that drives water out of the tissue. Lobed leaves, those with the deeply cut edges characteristic of oaks and maples, represent a particular kind of compromise. Lobing increases the overall perimeter of the leaf relative to its surface area, which increases the surface area available for gas exchange and allows more efficient photosynthesis in conditions where carbon dioxide concentration or light levels might otherwise be limiting. But a deeply lobed leaf is also more aerodynamically porous than a flat one. Wind passes through the spaces between the lobes rather than pushing against the whole surface, which reduces the mechanical stress on the leaf stem and makes the leaf less likely to tear in strong conditions. The shape is simultaneously a photosynthetic strategy and a structural one. The veins running through a leaf are far more than a scaffold. They form two distinct transport systems. The xylem, which runs through the center of each vein, carries water and dissolved minerals upward from the roots, through the stem, and into the leaf tissue, where it supplies the raw materials of photosynthesis. The phloem, surrounding the xylem, carries the products of photosynthesis, primarily sucrose, back down through the leaf stem and into the rest of the tree. Every vein is simultaneously a supply line and a distribution network, and the branching pattern of veins across a leaf, finer and finer as they extend toward the edges, ensures that no part of the leaf's surface is far from a source of water or a conduit for exporting what it makes. These venation patterns are distinctive enough that botanists use them as identification tools with the same reliability that fingerprints are used to identify individuals. The particular angle at which secondary veins branch from the midrib, the density of the finest vein network, the way the network terminates at the leaf margin. These details are consistent within a species and different enough between species that a trained eye can often name a tree from a fallen leaf alone, without any other information. Some leaves have taken their surface properties in a direction that seems almost counterintuitive. The lotus plant produces leaves that are superhydrophobic, meaning they repel water so completely that droplets bead up on the surface and roll off without wetting the leaf at all. Under a magnifying glass, the surface of a lotus leaf is covered in microscopic bumps coated with waxy nanocrystals. Water droplets rest on the tips of these bumps, in contact with so little surface area that they cannot spread. They bead, they roll. As they roll, they pick up any particles of dust or debris resting on the surface and carry them away. The leaf cleans itself with every rain, maintaining a pristine photosynthetic surface with no effort at all. Engineers studying this property, now called the lotus effect, have used it as the basis for a range of self-cleaning and water-repellent materials, including surface treatments for textiles, glass, and building materials. The largest undivided leaf in the plant kingdom belongs to a tree called Coccoloba gigantifolia, found in the Amazon basin. Individual leaves of this species can reach 2.5 meters in length, large enough to use as an impromptu shelter from rain, large enough to sit cross-legged on. The smallest functional leaves in the world belong to certain aquatic plants and some members of the bladderwort family, where individual leaf-like structures may be measured in fractions of a millimeter, barely visible to the unaided eye. Between these extremes lies an entire spectrum of form, each shape a solution to the particular problem of being alive in a particular place, in a particular light, with a particular amount of water available. Wherever autumn comes, wherever deciduous trees have grown near human settlements, people have found meaning in the falling of leaves. This is one of the more quietly remarkable things about the image. It appears, independently and with remarkable consistency, in the poetry and philosophy and visual art of cultures that had no contact with one another. The Chinese scholar watching leaves fall from a tree outside his study window. The Celtic farmer watching the oaks drop their leaves at the edge of the field. The Japanese monk in the temple garden, standing still beneath a maple in full colour. They did not share a language, a religion, or a body of knowledge. But they shared the image, and they understood it in ways that overlapped enough to suggest they were all watching the same truth from different vantage points. In Chinese classical poetry, the falling leaf is among the most enduring of all images. Poets of the Tang dynasty, writing more than 1,000 years ago, return to it repeatedly as a symbol of time passing, of distance from home, of the particular quality of feeling that comes in autumn when the light changes and the trees begin to thin. The falling leaf carried sorrow, but a sorrow that was also beautiful, a sorrow that was part of the natural order of things rather than an interruption of it. To watch leaves fall and feel moved by the watching was not weakness, it was attentiveness. It was the recognition that something real was happening and that it deserved acknowledgement. Japan refined this recognition into an aesthetic concept with a name. Mono no aware, which can be translated as the gentle sadness of impermanence, or sometimes as the pathos of things, describes a particular emotional response to the awareness that beautiful things are temporary. The response is not grief exactly, and it is not detachment. It is something more nuanced than either. A warm appreciation that is deepened rather than diminished by the knowledge that it will not last. The falling leaf is perhaps the most natural and most commonly cited expression of mono no aware. The red maple leaf in its brief perfection, falling in the October light, is beautiful in itself, and more beautiful still for the fact that it is already falling. In Japanese Zen Buddhism, the falling leaf is used as a direct teaching image. Teachers have pointed to it when speaking about non-attachment, about the natural completion of things, about the foolishness of trying to hold on to what is already in the process of releasing. The leaf does not cling. The branch does not pursue it. There is a rightness to the separation, a cleanliness to it, that the Zen tradition found worth studying. Several koans and dharma talks from the tradition reference the falling leaf directly, using its simplicity as a doorway into understanding that is too subtle for argument and too immediate for explanation. The connection between leaves and language runs deeper than metaphor. In ancient Rome, the word for a sheet of paper was folium, the same Latin root from which the botanical term foliage derives. A book was a collection of folia. To turn a page was, etymologically, to turn a leaf. When the English language later developed the phrase, turning over a new leaf, to mean making a fresh start or changing one's ways, the leaf being turned was originally a leaf of paper, a new page, a blank surface waiting to receive whatever would be written on it. But the deeper resonance of the phrase, the sense of release and renewal that it carries, reaches back through the paper to the tree, to the original leaf, to the image of something old being released to make way for something new. The practice of trying to catch a falling leaf before it reached the ground appears in folk traditions across multiple European cultures, particularly in Britain and Germany. The specific interpretation varied from place to place, but the common thread was that catching a leaf in the air, which required real attentiveness given the unpredictable path of a falling leaf, was a sign of good fortune, or a way of preserving something of the departing season, or simply an act of participation in the moment, rather than merely observation of it. The physical challenge of the task, the need to be present and responsive and quick, was itself part of the point. You could not catch a falling leaf while distracted. You had to be entirely there. Autumn leaf colour has become, in the modern era, a subject of genuine scientific attention, practical commercial interest, and increasingly sophisticated predictive modelling. The question of when leaves will peak, and how vivid the peak will be, turns out to be answerable in probabilistic terms, using data about temperature patterns, rainfall, tree physiology, and satellite imagery. Foliage forecasting is a real field, and the conditions that produce a spectacular autumn are specific enough that not every year delivers one. The United States Forest Service operates monitoring programs that track the progression of autumn color across forests in the eastern United States. University research programs in several states collect data on chlorophyll breakdown rates, temperature patterns, and precipitation, building models that can estimate, weeks in advance, when peak color is likely to arrive in any given region. The models are not perfect. Weather is too variable, and the interaction between species, microclimate, and year-specific conditions too complex for precise prediction. But they are accurate enough to be useful to the tourism industry and the millions of people who plan trips around seeing autumn colour in the forests of New England, the Appalachians, and the Great Lakes region. Peak colour, in scientific usage, refers to the point at which roughly 70% of the trees in a region have reached their maximum level of pigment change. Before this point, the display is building. After it, trees begin dropping their leaves in earnest, and the colour is soon replaced by bare branches. The peak window is narrow. In most regions, it lasts only 1 to 2 weeks before the transition to leaf drop begins in earnest. 2 weeks in which the landscape is doing something it will not do again for another year. Several specific weather conditions influence the intensity of that window. A summer with good rainfall and ample sunshine produces leaves that enter autumn rich in sugars, capable of producing vivid anthocyanins when the abscission process begins. A summer drought, by contrast, reduces photosynthetic activity and sugar production, which in turn limits the red end of the colour spectrum. The tree arrives at autumn with less to work with. An unusually warm autumn delays and sometimes diminishes colour development. The photoreceptors in leaves respond to shortening day length regardless of temperature, so the abscission process begins on schedule. But the cool nights that accelerate chlorophyll breakdown and trigger anthocyanin synthesis are absent. The tree begins the process of colour change, but does so slowly and without the cold night catalyst that produces the most saturated reds. The result is often a muted autumn, full of yellows and browns without much red, as though the season arrived in outline, but without its most intense pigments filled in. Climate change is making warm autumns more common. Long-term studies of foliage timing in the northeastern United States have documented a shift of approximately 2 to 3 weeks toward later peak colour compared to records from 50 years ago. The leaves still change, the chemistry still operates, but the calendar has shifted, and with it the relationship between autumn colour and the other rhythms of the natural year. Birds that time their migrations by foliage cues, insects that time their life cycle transitions by temperature and photoperiod, fungi that fruit in relation to soil temperature and moisture. All of these systems are responding to their own environmental signals, which are shifting at different rates and in different directions. The adjustment is ongoing, and its full implications are still being understood. Scientists have found a way to watch autumn's progression across entire continents at once. Satellite imagery capable of distinguishing between the reflectance properties of green leaves and changing or dry leaves allows researchers to track the brown wave of autumn leaf change moving across North America, Europe and Asia each year. The pattern is visible from space, a wave of colour that begins in the far north and at high altitudes, then spreads southward and downward over the following weeks, marking the progress of the season across the landscape at a scale that no ground-based observer could perceive. From that altitude, autumn is a slow tide, retreating toward winter. Autumn has a sound as distinctive as its colour. Most people know it before they can name it. The particular crunch of dry leaves underfoot, the low, continuous rustling of a canopy thinning in a breeze, the specific percussion of rain on a carpet of fallen leaves. These sounds are not incidental to the season. In certain contexts, they are among its most powerful presences, capable of locating a person in a particular moment in time with more precision than almost any visual cue. The crunch of dry leaves underfoot is caused by the structural collapse of the leaf's cellular architecture. When a leaf desiccates, the water that normally fills its cells and gives them their internal pressure, called turgor pressure, is lost. Without turgor, the cell walls buckle inward. The leaf becomes rigid in the way that a crumpled piece of thin paper is rigid, resistant to smooth deformation, prone to sudden, irreversible collapse when pressure is applied. When a foot presses down on a dry leaf, the cells fail catastrophically and rapidly, each small structural collapse releasing a tiny burst of acoustic energy. The thousands of cells in even a small leaf fail in rapid succession, and the result is the characteristic crunch that anyone who has ever walked through a deciduous forest in late October will recognize immediately. The frequency of that crunch falls primarily between 2,000 and 4,000 Hz, which is a range to which human hearing is particularly sensitive. This is not coincidental in the evolutionary sense. Human hearing is most acute in the frequency range of human speech and the sounds of animals moving through underbrush, and the crunch of dry leaves falls within that range. The sound is, in a purely auditory sense, vivid. It registers immediately, clearly, and with a sharpness that lower frequency sounds do not have. The rustling of leaves in wind has a different acoustic character entirely. It is a broadband sound, distributed across a wide range of frequencies, continuously variable in intensity as gusts come and go, with no sharp edges or sudden peaks. This quality of sound is called sitharism, a word that attempts to capture in language what the ear hears when wind moves through a canopy. It is among the most consistently cited sounds in psychoacoustic research on relaxation and stress reduction, appearing repeatedly in surveys asking people to describe sounds they find calming, restorative, or sleep-inducing. The mechanisms behind this effect are not fully understood, but several hypotheses connect the sound's properties to the physiological states associated with rest. The irregularity of natural wind in leaves prevents the habituation that occurs with perfectly regular sounds. The frequency distribution of the sound masks sharper, more alerting environmental noises. The low average intensity of the sound does not compete with the body's own quieting processes. The forest floor covered in dry autumn leaves changes the acoustic properties of the forest in ways that visitors often notice without understanding. Sound in an autumn forest feels muffled, softened, closer to silence than the same forest in summer, even though the ambient sounds of wind and wildlife may be similar. The leaf litter layer acts as a diffuse acoustic absorber. Sound waves striking the layer lose energy to the multiple small surfaces of the partially decomposed leaves, rather than reflecting back into the air. The effect is similar to the acoustic treatment used in recording studios, which employ irregular, porous surfaces to absorb sound, rather than surfaces that would reflect it back and create reverberation. The autumn forest floor is, in acoustic terms, a very effective sound-absorbing material. Rain falling on leaf litter produces a sound that is meaningfully different from rain on bare soil or on pavement. The leaf layer distributes the impact energy across thousands of small flexible surfaces, each one responding slightly differently to the drop that lands on it, each one deflecting the energy in a slightly different way. The result is a soft, distributed percussion, a continuous, gentle noise without the hard, focused impact that rain on stone or earth produces. People who have fallen asleep to the sound of rain often describe it in terms that align precisely with this quality. Soft, even, without sharp edges, endlessly variable within a narrow band of intensity. There is a quality of light in autumn that is different from the light of any other season, and the difference is not imagined. It is physical. It is the result of geometry. The Earth orbits the Sun with its axis tilted at approximately 23.5 degrees relative to its orbital plane. In summer, the northern hemisphere is tilted toward the Sun, and sunlight strikes the surface at a steep angle. The path the light takes through the atmosphere is relatively short. In autumn, the hemisphere is tilting away from the Sun. Sunlight strikes at a shallower angle. The path through the atmosphere is longer. This matters because the atmosphere is not perfectly transparent. It scatters light, and it scatters different wavelengths of light differently. Shorter wavelengths, the blues and violets, scatter more readily than longer wavelengths, the reds and oranges and yellows. In summer, when the sun's path through the atmosphere is short, this scattering is limited, and the full spectrum reaches the surface. In autumn, when the path is longer, more of the shorter wavelengths are scattered before they arrive. The light that reaches the surface is enriched in longer wavelengths, in reds and oranges and warm yellows. This is the same process that produces the vivid colours of sunrise and sunset. But in autumn, it operates not only at the horizon, and not only for a few minutes, but for much of the day, at a low angle that persists from morning well into afternoon. This explains something that people who spend time outdoors in autumn often notice without being able to account for. The light in autumn feels warm in a way that summer light, which is technically more intense, does not quite manage. The warmth is not merely the warmth of the season's colours. It is in the light itself, in the wavelengths that have survived the longer atmospheric path. When that warm, angled autumn light passes through the leaf of a deciduous tree, something else happens. The leaf's internal structure, which in summer is dense with green chlorophyll that absorbs most incoming light, has in autumn become translucent. As chlorophyll breaks down and the cell structure changes, light passes through the leaf rather than being fully absorbed. Looking at an autumn leaf in backlit sunlight, holding it up toward the sky, the veins become visible as a darker network against the glowing surface, and the leaf itself seems to generate colour from within rather than simply reflecting it. The reds appear to burn. The yellows appear to radiate. It is an optical effect, the product of transmitted rather than reflected light, but it produces a visual experience with a quality that many people describe as luminous. The forest floor in peak autumn colour reflects light back upward in a way that the green summer forest floor does not. A ground covered in fallen leaves in their full colour, yellows and reds and oranges catching the low-angle autumn sun, can brighten the entire understory from below. The quality of light inside an autumn forest is therefore different not only because of the sunlight coming in from above, but because of the reflected light rising from beneath. The light comes from multiple directions at once. The eye is surrounded by it. People walking through a peak autumn forest often describe a sensation of being inside the light, rather than merely exposed to it, as though the space between the trees is filled with something warm and slightly luminous that has no single source. All of this, the geometry of the Earth's orbit, the scattering properties of the atmosphere, the translucency of a leaf in its final pigment change, the reflectance of a fallen leaf on the forest floor, comes together in the few weeks of peak autumn to produce a quality of light that is genuinely unusual, genuinely available only in this season, and genuinely worth the attention people have been bringing to it for as long as people have been standing still in forests and looking up. As we come gently to the end of our time among the falling leaves, let everything we have moved through tonight settle for a moment before it softens and drifts away. We began at the cellular level in a structure so small it has no color or weight, in the narrow junction between a leaf and its branch, where a tree quietly prepares its release long before the release is visible. We watched chemistry unfold across an entire season, green giving way to gold and amber and red, each color the result of a different process. Some pigments revealed, some manufactured fresh in the last warm days of autumn, all of them building toward a display that has stopped people in their tracks in forests on every temperate continent for as long as people have been walking through forests. We followed the leaf downward through the air, through the 4 modes of descent that physics makes possible, depending on the particular weight and shape of any given leaf, through the slow, unpredictable path that makes catching a falling leaf an act requiring full attention. We watched it land on the forest floor and understood that landing not as an ending, but as an entrance into a different kind of work, into the fungi and bacteria and invertebrates that would return everything the leaf was made of back to the soil, back to the roots, back to the tree that made it. We stood in the forests where autumn is most vivid, in the maple forests of New England, in the temple gardens of Japan where koyo has been observed for centuries, in the ancient, species-rich valleys of the Great Smoky Mountains, where the color gradates across hundreds of different kinds of trees at once. We sat with the ginkgo, the oldest surviving leaf shape on Earth, and watched it drop nearly everything it has in a single afternoon of pure yellow falling. We listened to the season, to the crunch underfoot and the rustling that researchers have given the name Scythurism, to the soft percussion of rain distributed across thousands of small leaf surfaces. We stood inside the light of it, the warm, long wavelength light that arrives in autumn because the earth has tilted just far enough away from the sun that the atmosphere enriches the arriving light with red and gold. We understood that the glow inside an autumn forest is not only coming from above, it is coming from the ground as well, rising from the fallen leaves themselves, surrounding everything in warmth that has no single source. And underneath all of it, through every cluster and every color and every falling trajectory, one thing returned again and again. The leaf does not hold on past the right moment. The tree has already prepared for the ending before the ending arrives. The release, when it comes, is not a failure. It is the completion of something that was always going to complete. The color that appears in the final weeks is not a sign of distress. It is the most vivid the leaf will ever be. There is something worth carrying from that, not as a lesson exactly, not as an instruction, but as an image to rest beside for a moment before sleep. That endings can be beautiful. That letting go, done at the right moment and in the right way, can be among the most graceful things a living system does. That the falling itself, that slow, unpredictable, luminous descent through autumn air, is not the least of what the leaf accomplishes. It may be the most of it. If this quiet journey has been good company tonight, the sleepy mind is always glad of a like, or a subscription, or a thought left gently in the comments. This channel exists because people find something worth returning to in these slow, unhurried evenings together. Your being here is what makes it possible to keep going. And if you find yourself still awake, there is another door waiting on the screen. Another subject that deserves more attention than the busy world usually gives it. Another slow walk into something that turns out to be larger on the inside than it appeared from the outside. But if your eyes are already heavy, let them close. Let the forest floor soften beneath you. Let the leaves settle where they have landed. Let the autumn light, warm and sourceless, fade the way it fades at the end of a golden afternoon. Not all at once, but gradually, the air cooling, the colours deepening, and then slowly releasing their brightness, until what remains is the quiet dark of a forest after the season's best day. You do not need to hold on to any of what you heard tonight. You do not need to remember the names, or the processes, or the sequence of colours as the chlorophyll withdraws. The mind will keep what it needs, and the rest will settle into the forest floor of sleep, where it will do its own slow work without being asked. All that remains now is the breath. Your own particular breath, slow and even and continuous, carrying you as it always has from one moment to the next, without effort, without instruction, without needing to be told what to do. Let it continue. Sleep well and good night.